As you guys know, about 10 months ago, I bought this R32 Skyline from Facebook Marketplace. All right, so here it is, guys. Here's the R32 Skyline. This was easily one of the biggest risks I had ever taken. I picked this car up for about 7,000 Australian dollars, and unfortunately, when we started it for the first time, it sounded like this. Now, I guess through my large reach from my YouTube channel, I somehow got in contact with the R32's previous owner, and he actually told me it had been stolen from his family in the past by thieves who also vandalized it and blew up the motor. I bought a stolen R32 Skyline.
The one day he ends up taking it to work, it gets stolen.
So anyway, we ended up pulling the motor. We found a fist-sized hole in the engine block. I then picked up another RB20 off Facebook Marketplace and I swapped it into the R32 so I could then move it around. We then got it painted from our friends at Royal Drip Works and Auto Indulgence, and now it looks like this. It looks so good. So good. At this stage, we technically have restored the R32 to its former glory, but that's kind of boring. You see, I want to take things a step further. I want to make bulk power. And that is why, guys, I bought this RB25 Neo from Gumtree.
Watch me now, baby.
In the last video of the R32 Skyline, we picked up this RB25 Neo from Gumtree all the way on the other side of the city. It was actually complete, it had a head on it, had pistons in it, and I also got it for relatively cheap. Now, of course, when you buy cheap things, there's always bad news, and that's exactly what there was when we pulled this thing apart. We pulled this thing apart and the oil was milky. It was disgusting. There was scores on the bores. It looked like the motor had been abused and like the head gasket had blown or something. But what that meant was we had to take the engine to a machine shop, get it bored out, get it measured to make sure that it would still work. We even got the block decked. We got the head decked at another shop. A lot of stuff has been happening behind the scenes, guys. We have just been basically saving for parts because this stuff is not bloody cheap. So here it is. This is the RB25 block that's been decked, and I actually painted it over the past couple of days. It's looking pretty good. It's painted with black heat resistant paint. We made sure to cover everything up with tape. Now, initially when I dropped this block off to the machine shop, they had it for a little bit and they looked at the bores. From factory, these bores are 86 millimeters in diameter. The machine shop basically told me that the bores were too far gone and the scoring marks were really bad, so they said that I had to oversize the bores to 86.5 millimeters. Now, the original plan was to keep it stock, but because we went 86.5 millimeters, half a mil oversized, that meant that I may as well put forged internals in. So that's where the money has gone. There are boxes on boxes of parts everywhere in this garage, but here are the pistons. We went with Ross Performance racing pistons. These are 86.5 millimeters to suit an oversized bore. And there you go, there's billet pistons. These are not cheap, and that's the reason why there has been a delay of R32 content. Now, the RB25 is notorious for having oiling issues, but I want to learn the RB platform, and I'm sure once everything's fixed, then we're gonna have a pretty stout motor, if I can put it together correctly. So while the engine was apart, we did get the crank modified. Ooh. So this, guys, is a factory RB25 DET crank, and where some of the oiling issues start. It seems like these RBs from Nissan come with so many different oiling issues that you need to perfect, but that's okay. We're gonna fix those and hopefully make a stout motor. Now, the first thing you wanna do if you have your engine apart is install a crank collar at the end of a crank. That's because from factory, they have these small little slits on the crank that spin your oil pump, and because there's not much engagement, over time, they actually wear away and start causing vibrations and can eventually end up cracking your oil pump gears and then starving your engine of oil. No oil means kaboom. So what you want to do is get a machine shop to install a longer crank collar. Now, the next thing a good machine shop is going to do is drill and tap the crank to get access to some of the oil galleries in the crank, because these oil galleries get filled up over time, and most of these engines are like 20 plus years old. So they get filled up over time with oil, gunk, some metal maybe, and it's almost impossible to clean the oil galleries out unless you do this. They also provide you with these little grub screws. So once you're done cleaning, you can put the grub screws in with a bit of Loctite, and then you've got a nice clean crank. But that's basically it in terms of the oiling problems with the crank. So I started cleaning the crank with some degreaser, spraying them into the oil gallery holes. Then I brought it over to the workbench and used some compressed air to spray into the galleries, making sure to remove all the grease and grime built up over the past couple of years. Now I could have got the machine shop to do this, but to save a little bit of money I decided to clean it myself. And now because we're doing everything on the inside of the engine, I decided to turn it over. The crank is now clean. The next thing we're going to do is clean the block and install the bearings. I went ahead and bought ACL Performance bearings. These are standard size, and this is also what I was recommended to buy from the machine shop. I've never done this before, but I've watched many research. Research is key. I then brought the girdle over, removed all the old bolts, sprayed everything down with degreaser, wiped everything down on the bench, and all we needed to do now was press in the new bearings. We now have the girdle cleaned, and I have the bearings, which we're now going to press in. Now, I don't know if I need to clean these when I'm installing them for good. We're just testing clearances right now, so I'm just going to press them in and then test clearance, but I'm going to try to be really careful with these bearings. Most metal products come with like a coating to stop them from rusting, so I'm just going to clean them off a little bit. Now the repair manual actually says to not put any oil behind the surface of the bearing, and I've watched a few videos as well where people say that can muck up the clearances, so I'm of course not going to be doing that, as that can muck up the clearances, so we're not going to mess around with that. This is so delicate. We've now installed all the bearings in the girdle, and we're now going to install all the bearings in the block. You really can't mess this up. The bearings only go in one way. There's a protrusion on the bearing that goes into the slot on the block, and the same with on the girdle. The only bearing that you need to watch out for is the thrust bearing, which goes in the middle of the motor. The ACL bearings are now installed, so we're going to put the crank in and then put our main studs in. All right, here goes nothing. Crank install. Oh, that's pretty cool. Here is the crank installed. Have a look at that. Now, because we're basically going all out on this build, I've decided to, of course, grab some ARP main studs. ARP, everyone knows those three letters in the automotive industry, ARP. Now, if you're gonna do this, just remember that there are 3 bolts that are different lengths compared to every other one. So I've just got this printed out, and it says 1, 11, and 12. They're the longer ones. So you gotta make sure that you put the longer ones in that position. We have the crank installed, the main studs installed. Now we are going to be checking the clearances for the bearings that I've got. So these are standard sized bearings, and the way that we're going to check the clearance is of course with Plastigauge. There it is right there, that green little line. We're going to repeat this for every single main bearing, tighten everything down with the correct torque specs, and then see what clearances we have. Main studs and bolts all installed now. Now in most cases with engine building, there's a sequence that you need to follow in order to torque everything down correctly. There is also a desired torque spec, and in this case it's 60 foot-pounds, and you usually want to torque things in increments. So for this it's 60 foot-pounds. We're going to start off with 20, then go 40, and then finally 60. We've now torqued everything up. Now we need to take it all apart again to check the Plastigauge. So there you go, there's the mark of the Plastigauge you can see. And basically with this little sheet right here, we're going to compare the thickness of the Plastigauge to see how much clearance we have for the main bearings. Now somebody on the forums said that 0.0015 to 0.002 inches is a pretty good clearance, and that's what they go by, especially on high horsepower applications, because a little bit more clearance means that there is a little bit of room for expansion. There you go, that's 0.002. Basically exactly that. That one is a tiny bit thicker than 0.002. This one here is a better clearance of 0.0015. 0.02, that one's also 0.02. This one, tiny bit thicker between 0.0015 and 0.002, and same with the back one. So we have a bit more clearance on the first front couple of main bearings, but the rest are showing pretty similar results, which means that we should be okay. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty happy with these clearances, so I'm going to take the crank out, clean everything, clean the girdle, and then put everything together for its final torque spec with lubrication. And then we got the crank installed, baby. We've now got the girdle installed torque to spec in 3 passes. The crank's also installed. And if you guys were watching closely, I didn't actually have the oil squirters installed. They are now in there. I'll quickly show you. Before I tightened everything down, I did actually forget to install the oil squirters. They have now been installed, as you can see. You can't get access to the oil squirters when you got the crank installed, but yeah, everything's looking pretty damn good. Turns really nice and smoothly. Barely need to use any effort, which is good. Hopefully we did the bearing clearances right, but pretty confident that we did. All right, guys, next day now. And like I said before, we are going to be replacing the Welsh plugs. So on this side of the block, I've already replaced all the Welsh plugs. Never done Welsh plugs before, but I watched a video and it's very easy to do. So the tools that we'll be using, a flathead, a metal bit going all the way through, and a hammer. And what we do is you tap either the top or the bottom, and the Welsh plug will then sort of start tilting, and then you can pull it out with some locking pliers. I've got these. So just gonna tap this a few times. And you can see sometimes we have the issue of the Welsh plug actually falling in the block, but there's not really anywhere where it can go. So what I do here, it's a bit tricky, but you sort of grab it and then you pry it. The Welsh plugs will only come out in the center of the hole. There you go. Easy as that. So I forgot to mention a vital step here. You want to sand down the surface of where the Welsh plug gets pressed in. Otherwise, they'll be very difficult to press in. So I've taken out all the Welsh plugs, sanded and cleaned all the area of where the Welsh plugs sit. And what I'm going to do is put a little bit of grey silicone around the Welsh plug, just for insurance, because you never know, they might leak because you might tap them in ever so slightly incorrectly. But just a little bit of silicone doesn't hurt. I'm going to put the Welsh plug in the position, try to make it as straight as possible, and then lightly tap it in. Now that the Welsh plugs are installed, it's time to start doing the bottom end. Now, I showed you guys already that we went with some Ross Performance pistons, and now I'm gonna show you what con rod that we're going. We have gone with Max Peating Rods con rods. That's right, Max Peating Rods. So this is going to be very controversial because a lot of people think cheap is not always good, but I've talked about this on the channel before. You got to be smart cheap. Another common brand of con rods that people go are spool rods. You see, the thing is, these are basically exactly the same, and some people even say that the Max Peating Rods con rods are made in the same factory as spool. So they come nicely packaged, all wrapped up in some oil so that they don't corrode or start rusting. There you go. This is the Max Peating Rods con rod. Now, I don't know the exact specs in terms of weight, but they are weighed within 0.001 grams of each other. They also include ARP hardware from the factory. So these are ARP bolts on the con rod ends. It actually says it somewhere. Not sure if the camera's gonna pick it up. But if you look at a spool rod for an RB25, they look very, very similar. Here's a closer look at it all. It's a very nice rod, looks very thick. Now this is a con rod, guys. It's a vital part of the engine. It's the heart of the engine, and I wouldn't put something like this unless I had personally experienced them myself, or I had a mate that has ran these in his car and it's been reliable. My mate Turbo Tristan actually put these in his RB30 build that made over 300 kilowatts, and he had absolutely no problems with it. And that car is still running. I believe it's, making more than 300 kilowatts. I'm not too sure, but a lot of people have done testing and measuring of these con rods and compared them with some more expensive brands out there. And it turns out these con rods are basically to standard when it comes to high horsepower applications, and they look exactly the same as some other brands out there as well. So here are the pistons on the con rod, which I've installed off camera, and I've done 5 of them and left the last one on purpose so I could show you how it's done. Now, the way those gudgeon pins are held into the pistons are with these little snap rings right here, and they are a pain in the ass to install. These little rings that these Ross Performance gudgeon pins are held in with are really difficult to get in, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So what I like to do is put a little bit of oil just around here so we don't scratch up anything, so there's not direct metal on metal contact, there's a bit of oil in between. And we get these clips just like so. They have like a bit of a sharp edge, so you gotta be really careful. Some people actually sand these down so that they don't scratch anything, but you have to put this in there and force it down with all your force with your thumbs. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do this on camera. I'll try my best here, but I've absolutely ruined my thumbs. First go, no way. No way. And then there's like a little gap here. For the last bit, I like to just push it down with a screwdriver. Hopefully it doesn't fly out now, but I just like to push it down there. There we go. That was pure luck. It's been a pain in the ass to install the rest of them, but there we go. So we've installed all the Max Pitting rods exactly the same way. So we're just gonna look at the other ones. There we go, sliding in very nicely. Now I've already done 5 of these, that's why I'm doing this so quickly, but to do your first couple of them, you will ruin your fingers and it hurts. So good luck if you're doing this at home. We've now got our conrods and pistons installed. They are now connected. And now we're gonna check the backlash on the crank with the new bearings. So I got this special tool from Amazon. It was a cheap tool, so I don't know exactly how accurate it is, but we're just gonna go off this. So what we're testing is end float, how much the crank moves back and forth, because with new bearings, you need to make sure that you've got the correct end float. The end float should be roughly 0.1 millimeters. So I'm going to show you how I've checked that. So we've got this dial gauge, which has a little fitting on the end. And as you can see, if you move the fitting, it moves the gauge. And what we're going to test for is how much this crank moves back and forth. So I've set the gauge to 0 on the crank when I've got the crank all the way to the back side of the motor. And when I push it to the front side of the motor, you can see it moves about 0.1 millimeters. There's the back of the motor. And that's the front of the motor just there. So how I'm doing this is using a screwdriver and just applying some force to the back and the front of the crank. And that way we can move the crank back and forth. All right, guys, we have a special guest with us here today, TT. TT hasn't been on the channel for a while. He's been busy building Civics and Honda.
Building heaps of cars, too many, but I've built an RB before and Rex hasn't, so I'm here to oversee.
I was talking to them actually about how you put max pitting rods in your RB30 and that's still running, right?
Yeah, so compression tested perfect. It balanced up absolutely perfect and it runs absolutely perfect. Here's a little secret. But Max Pitting rods actually make the rods for several other brands. I won't mention them because I don't want to get sued, but they make rods for several other brands of manufacturers that people pay a lot of money for. So they are very good rods. If you go to any machine shop and get them to balance them, they balance and weigh up the full set will be within like half a gram.
Now the machine shop, when they took the block and the crank, they also checked the ring gaps and they also grinded them down to whatever they thought was right for the amount of boost that we're running. And because they're a machine shop, they obviously know more than me, so I'll let them do that. But just to double check their work, of course, TT is going to help us.
I brought this just in case. I just got this from eBay. Came really, really handy before I was filing them by hand and measuring. So file, measure, file, measure. It makes sure that both sides are even and you can smooth off the edges and stuff really easily.
So what we're doing here is placing each ring into the bore and checking the little gap to make sure that it's the right distance apart. We're just using the piston to push it down about an inch into the block, and then we're using a feeler gauge to make sure they're in spec. And it looks like the machine shop did a pretty good job. You want to say something?
Something. So we've just checked all of the rings. Cylinders 1 through 5 were all dialed. The machine shop did those. We've triple checked, Rex checked, and I checked twice.
Yes.
Cylinder number 6 just needs a little bit of a finagling. We're going to use the ring filer now, which is the only time we've had to use it so far. We may have to do it on the bottom ring as well. You push the ring all the way up until these little metal bits, and then just give it a little squeeze. While you're doing that, you turn this and it sort of grinds it for you.
It's all slippery now.
Yeah, I made it slippery.
Just how you like it, TT.
Oh yeah. I love to grind. Need some of that Diddy lube. So just stick this in here and hopefully it touches but doesn't drag, and it's still really tight. So I might give it just a little tickle and then that one should be good to go and send it.
And now Tristan is using his hands
bad boy for life.
So we are using some mineral oil as well because that's what the instructions say to do. So we've got some 15W40. We're only using this just to put on the piston rings. We're not actually going to be using this oil, I don't think, to be running the engine in. I don't know what to do yet, so
with the pistons, there's a little cutout there for the oil squirters, and there's actually an arrow on these pointing to the front, and I just checked. Yep, that's all good to go. And I've got this dude here, which is a Wiseco piston squeezer innerer. It's like tapered, so the further you push it down, it squeezes all the rings together and then pretty much pops straight into the cylinder. So always good when you have the right tools.
Perfect.
Boom.
Damn, piston in. There's a forged internal, one of 6.
Don't worry, we'll clean all this oil off before we put the head gasket on, Diddy style.
All right, guys, we almost had a massive problem. So the grub screw, I forgot to install I had a spare grub screw and I thought that the machine shop just included a spare one, but turns out I just missed it. So I'm gonna triple check all of them again. But yeah, that could have been really, really bad. We just put some plastic gauge on these bearings as well. And I'm just gonna show you me checking it so you can understand what exactly we're doing. The clearance on these conrod caps are much better than the main bearings. Looking good. Looking good, TT. Mint. The bottom end is in. Hell yeah.
All the clearances are all good. It's been machined by professionals. All we did was really just assemble it. We checked everything. So I'm confident that that'll be good. This is like my 4th or 5th maybe engine, maybe 5th engine I've built.
Hell
I'll
yeah.
try come back for when we put the head on, maybe if I have time. But Rex and Lachlan have done that a bunch of times themselves, so they'll be fine with that.
TT is a busy guy. He's got lots going on. And if you want to go check out his channel, you guys already know, Turbo Tristan.
Yep, come over, check out Turbo Tristan, see some Honda builds. I know you guys are always hassling him to do a Honda, so just come and see me. We'll do a Honda together.
He's gone from Skylines to Hondas now because that's like what's affordable. This is just stupid, isn't it?
It's expensive.
Yeah.
So this is big boy stuff, playing with RBs and Skylines, but it's the funnest and it sounds the best and it's better than Jay-Z's. So
they are good. They're good motors, but you do have to fix everything. You got to fix everything.
Oh yeah, there's heaps of issues, oil issues, clearance issues, like you name it. There's
oiling issues everywhere.
It's
but I guess you can fix it. That's the main thing. You can fix all those issues and then you've got a stout motor. So there you guys go. The RB25 has now been fully forged. It's now just in some cling wrap. Got to get this thing on the road because it's literally just sitting in the garage untouched at the moment. It's looking so good though. Anyway guys, make sure that you subscribe to see this RB25 put in the R32. We've never done anything like this before, doing a forged bottom end. So yeah, hopefully everything goes good and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.